So, hi everyone, and thanks for the very nice introduction. My name is Irene, and let's get a little bit more technical and a little bit more into the details of what co-op actually means in a world where we're seeing shifting ad spend dollars into the world of digital. And let's also bring this a little bit down and talk about what this actually means for the world of paid search in particular. Andreas already set the stage. I think he made a good case in explaining how relevant the co-op opportunity is, how big it is. So at the moment, we know that co-op actually accounts for about $70 billion a year, whereof 25 billion are usually spent in the US market. So at the moment, 12% of the co-op budgets that we're seeing, 12% of the marketing spend, are spent on co-op budgets. However, if we look at the scene in detail, we see that most of the co-op budgets are still spent not in the world of online, they are mostly spent on offline channels. So we see those dollars go into TV commercials, we see it going into billboards, into offline media advertising, and into in-store media. So we see, for example, perfume cooperations from Giorgio Armani with Macy's. Or we see cooperations where you can get a free Coca-Cola when you're buying your burger at McDonald's. Or another example, you can see a cooperation of Urban Outfitters with Adidas. So what does this mean, and is this still adequate? We know that around 47% of the retail marketers spend more than 50% of their marketing budgets on digital advertising. And this does not really correspond with what we've heard about where the co-op budgets are currently spent. So we know, and I think Scott also gave you some very good examples, how important it is to take Amazon and Google into consideration, especially Amazon is setting the stage and changing this a lot. And we also know that other players like Microsoft and also Google are pushing on this side and enter the field. If you ask yourself where the 42 billion that Andreas mentioned in his introductory speech is coming from, this is actually the considerations that we took to estimate this. So when we talk to e-commerce players, we're seeing, as I said, that they are spending 80% of the co-op budgets on offline. However, they also, because they are e-commerce pure players, spend 80% of the marketing budgets on digital. So the gap in between, these are the 42 billion that we're talking about, taking into consideration the entire available 70 billion of co-op budgets that I mentioned in the very beginning. So this is a really, really big opportunity. If you think the 42 billion might be a little bit exaggerated, then take into consideration the numbers that Scott just showed you, the stats that where he explained the market capitalization of Amazon. I'd say Amazon already accounts in a very short period of time for about 50% of those $42 billion. So if you as a retailer or if you as a manufacturer want to spend those dollars outside of Amazon, what should you do? And I have a very simple explanation and a very simple recommendation. Don't take it with a pinch of salt and don't question my math skills, but it's going to be a very simple example. So follow the 80-20 rule. We've already discussed that 80% of the co-op budgets at some point might go into digital. So where to spend your dollars in digital? So we know that more than 75% of all ad-induced conversions and revenues come from search. And in search, we also know that it's exactly search PLA that's gaining more importance. So at the moment, our retailers, the clients that we Crealytics work with, they spend roughly 75 to 80% on PLA. So this is where, in our opinion, the big opportunity lies. And if you were supposed to spend your dollars outside of Amazon, this is where the field is going to move forward. And this is also where I believe that retailers and brands need to find new ways how they can actually work together. without getting too technical, let's have a very brief look at what the stage actually looks like. So where is this game going to be played? You know very well that this is the search engine's results page that you're seeing on Google, and it's composed by two parts. You're seeing the product listing ads, and underneath you see the traditional text ads. Product listing ads are basically product placement that Google automatically matches against search queries and against what actually users are searching on Google. Underneath you're having text ads, which were originally the flagship product from Google, where an advertiser is basically writing ads to match these against the search queries. And now we have a stage where product listing ads actually took over this traditional flagship product, and we know that these are a little bit more the attractive format. They are a little bit more visual, a little bit more down the funnel, because they are directly relating to the product in particular, and they drive slightly better conversion rates. Any advertiser now has to bid in the auction space on these two formats, and they basically pay the real estate, and they have to decide where they want to allocate their money. What they always have to take into consideration is the higher they bid, the more real estate they can occupy, and presumably the more revenue they also gonna get out of these ads. However, they have to outbalance this with the costs, so everybody has to find the sweet spot where you actually drive the most revenue given your current existing budgets. We know that those prominent listings, especially on the product listing ads, drive more than 75% of the PPC sales. And this is where it is actually important for brands and retailers to find new ways to actually cooperate and to drive the most out of the given opportunity. It's very, very hard for a retailer alone to afford being in the top spot all the time. And it's also very hard for brands to do this by themselves. This is where the big opportunity lies, because this is where retailers and brands can actually join forces. This is where they can add up their budgets. This is where they can work together and where they can try and occupy more real estate. This is where they can also try and drive their competitors out of the most prominent spots, and where they can join forces in order to drive more and better results and have a more prominent listing. I'd say intellectually and strategically, this is not very complicated to understand that we are seeing a very big opportunity. However, we also know that operationally, there are several constraints that are at the moment limiting the scalability of co-op advertising, and I try to summarize it into 4 different aspects that I consider important in particular. First, it's the performance measurement. So if you just take co-op budgets and you layer those budgets on top of your existing bidding structure, you have a measurability problem, because you as a retailer, you want to know whether the conversions that you are driving are actually coming from your own retail budget, from your own performance marketing budget, or whether the conversion was actually triggered by the co-op budget that might even come from a different department. It might come from trade mostly. And you want to have a good measurability of what you're actually doing and where you should allocate your budgets and how you should outbalance those in order to drive the most value. And on the contrary, you also have a reporting issue if you just layer bits on top of your existing activity, because a brand also wants to know if you're actually selling their products or if you don't. I think it's a known issue and a known problem for everybody in the world of search, that when people are searching for a particular product, they might not always end up buying this product in particular. So they might search for a Adidas Gazelle sneaker and end up buying a sneaker from Nike because that's what has been the more attractive offer on the website. This is also a reporting issue. So I'm aware that the retailers at the moment do cooperate with brands, and they do get those co-op funds, and I am aware that some of them don't share revenue numbers with their co-op partners. They don't share and nor do they share the numbers and the revenues that are caused and triggered by the actual product sold. And this is a lack of transparency that, in my opinion, has to be solved if we want to find a scalable solution for co-op. And it's not an easy one to solve, because at the moment, what we encounter oftentimes is that we have a cooperation of brands and retailers. Brands give their budgets a little bit in a pay and pray mode, and they hope that what's coming back to them is actually tangible and valid numbers. Then there is also a budgeting problem that relates to this. I know that retailers sometimes they take co-op budgets, but they have no commitment to actually spend those budgets to the full extent. Sometimes they use the budget only to a certain extent, or they use it to fund promotions and to subsidize price reductions on those products. And lastly, if you want to scale co-op advertising in the cooperation between brands and retailers, you have to work with thousands, hundreds of brands, and that is also a scalability problem. It requires doing forecasts, it requires digging into the numbers. If you want to report on the performance of actual products sold, it requires some efforts on the tracking side and on the attribution side. And that is a lot of complexity and a lot of manual work that's currently added to your regular paid search activities. So how can we solve this? One suggestion is that retailers and brands work together and start dividing and conquering. That means instead of just adding the co-op budgets on top of the regular existing paid search activity, they get a little bit more smarter in the way how they actually distribute this. We know that retailers tend to split their budgets already on prospecting and retargeting activity. And one way to actually solve this puzzle is to give brands access to their audience base and let the brands show their products for their already existing audiences. That would allow the brands to show the product to the right person, and it would also allow the retailers to separate their existing activity from the co-op activity. In addition to that, there is interesting features. Google, for example, offers a feature that is called similar audiences, where you can even broaden the scope of this activity and where you can also show products to audiences that are similar to your already existing customer base. And this would also allow to bring the retailer to offer a certain prospecting aspect to this activity. Doing this, you would have a clearer separation between the existing BAU paid search activity from the retailer, and you would have a clear distinguishment to what you're actually doing with your co-op budgets, and it would have a budget separation and a lot more transparency in what you're actually showing and reporting to the brands. As a second step, what is absolutely required is a more granular attribution of the revenues. So brands need to know if the revenues that are reported to them were actually caused by their own products. So they need to have access to an interface where they can log in and where they can have a look at the revenue numbers themselves. And there has to be a comprehensive overview in order to review the spend and maybe even make adjustments to the budgets. And this is something that has to be able to scale. And as a next step, there has to be a compromise between retailers and the brands in order to set the stage for how much budget has to be involved and under what circumstances. A best practice could look like what you see on the slide, so that the retailers and the brand actually work together and define a maximum budget that the brand is willing to contribute to the paid search activity of the retailer, and they agree on a guaranteed minimum ROAS, a return on ad spend. What that means is that if the ROAS is met, the budget is open and can flow. If the ROAS is not achieved, then the budgets are frozen. That means there is no overspending, but there is also a certain commitment from the retailer because they know what the efficiency is that they're actually driving with their co-op activity, and that's something they can mutually agree on. Lastly, we need to solve the problem of manual work involved in running co-op advertising in the paid search world. So there has to be a high degree of automation involved. You need technical solutions for all the problems mentioned before. you need to assign co-op budgets for hundreds and thousands of brands. You need to set up those campaigns. You need to have a good solution to set up the audiences that are backing up this approach. And you need to have a bidding solution that allows you to optimize those campaigns towards a performance target. And lastly, there has to be a reporting dashboard that allows both players to actually have a transparent look at the numbers and share their insights. So to sum this up, I think there is a big opportunity in doing this. So if a retailer wants to move into digital co-op, then I'd say this is the most efficient way to do it. We also see that there is an increased awareness for co-op in general. So we see Amazon pushing into this. We see also Microsoft and Google working on solutions to actually automate this. So this is where I believe the game is going to be played forward. And yes, thanks for your attention and looking forward to your questions.
Questions for Irene? I'm happy to kick things off. You kind of touched on, we've spent a lot of time talking about what Amazon is doing with their sponsored products, and at the end you kind of talked a little bit about Google and Microsoft doing a few things. Like, how does the Google and Microsoft solution compare to what an ideal solution would look like?
So what Google and Microsoft are both offering at the moment is an approach where you're able to add and layer budgets on top of the existing paid search activity. I've already digged a little bit into the transparency issue, that if you're just layering budgets on top, if you're just increasing bids, you have a problem distinguishing what's your regular paid search activity and what's actually your additional activity with the co-op budgets is causing in terms of revenue and conversions. In addition to that, I believe it's a mandatory requirement to have a certain efficiency metric involved in the co-op activity. So I believe it only makes sense if the retailers and the brands sit together and agree on a minimum efficiency that this activity has to hit in order to be successful and in order to allow the co-op budgets to be spent. I don't think it makes sense to just spend budgets and layer them on top of the existing activity without taking these two aspects into consideration.
So they lack kind of measurability and accountability.
Exactly.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I'm not familiar with the Microsoft solution. Sorry. Is it possible that this will create competition among retailers for the co-op dollars? So if there is participation from the retailer that's variable, is it possible it creates a more competitive environment?
Of course, yes. So for sure there is a competition for the co-op dollars. And it always has been the case. I mean, even in the offline world, there was always a competition for co-op dollars because the brands, they have an interest in cooperating with the retailers. There is also dependencies. I'm not going to doubt that. But of course, it's a competitive field. But so is search. And not everybody can afford those top positions. So I think both retailers have to be smart in finding good solutions, how they can make it attractive, working with them. But it's also the brands that have to be smart about where they want to invest their co-op dollars.